For that introduction and that inspiration that we should all have our notes out and our phones out, take some information, and enjoy this knowledge-packed evening of practical steps in how we can attain our financial freedom or work towards it. Some house rules. We've got, this is a non-smoking venue, so if you'd like to smoke, you are welcome to go outside in the wind. And we've got our restrooms right by the bar at the back. And if there's an emergency, please remain calm and be at the assembly point by the fire hydrant at the exit right there. And another welcome again to our online guests from TimesLIVE as well as LinkedIn. And we do have a competition for our live guests as well as our online guests for your online activity on Twitter and interaction with the hashtag Nedbank Private Clients. The online guests will win 3,000 Rand cash. And for us, we win this book, guys. We need this to start our year and start it right. So we'll be giving, you'll have more money with this book, I promise you. So we're going to be giving 3 of these books away, again, from your online interaction on Twitter with the hashtag Nedbank Private Clients. And if you have forgotten, we are here at the Nedbank Private Off the Menu event for young professionals brought to you by Nedbank and Nedbank. So today's conversation and today's webinar, the seminar is going to be very conversational, where we've got the Nedbank reps that are going to take us through some of the questions that you have, some of the questions that I have for myself as a young professional, or when you're starting out the career. So it's going to be very conversational, and we're going to have an opportunity to also ask. So get your notepads out, get your phone out, and please also keep your phones on silent. Yes, you can take videos and take pictures, but please ensure that your phones are on silent. Thank you. So let's get right into it with the first question. So as you know, with young professionals and the offering that Nedbank has for young professionals, there are so many expenses like that you go into when you're starting out your career. So a study debt, for instance. There is now maybe relocating to another city. There is a car that you need. There is rent that you need to pay. So what advice do you have for someone who's in that position and they feel like they need to first save up to start?
Sure, I'll take that one. Hi, everyone. I'm Sinead de Villiers. It's nice to be here with you tonight. I think the most important thing when you just start out, and actually at any point in your life, is to just start.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that the best advice my brother gave me when I was first starting to work was especially around my retirement savings. He's 9 years older than me, and I told him, like, after paying rent and now that I have to buy my own food and now that I have to put in my own petrol, like, nothing's going to be left. And you look at your options to choose how much you want to put away for retirement and how much you keep. And I was like, no, I need to keep as much as possible. And he then warned me and he said, your biggest friend, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot tonight, is time and the power of compounding. And he's like, I promise you, use the tax benefit that your retirement savings offer you. You can save for retirement pre-tax. Get started, forget that you even have that money, build your life without it, because there's so many South Africans that just aren't ready to retire when they get there. And I must say, 15 years later, I'm so grateful that I got that advice from him, because it's so tempting to not start. It's so tempting to think, no, I need as much money as possible in my own bank account. So my one piece of advice for young professionals would be just start working on your retirement savings as much as you can possibly put away pre-tax.
And awesome. I think to add to what Sine said, so I'm Tracy Jensen, and this one's going to hurt, your car and where you live is a lifestyle decision, not an asset. So I often hear people say, but I bought this house and it's going to grow in value, or I bought this flat and I don't have money left to save. And I've spoken to people even who earn 100,000 a month. So the problem is you just keep upgrading your house and your car and you never have enough to save. So as hard as it is, I think sometimes it's important when you look at your expenses so that you can save is what's more important? Like, should I make some lifestyle sacrifices so that I can save, so that it works for me? Because the later you start, the harder you're going to have to work to put in. So the earlier you start, even if it's small amounts, like just start with something and let the growth work for you instead of you having to work hard and constantly be chasing this car and house.
Yes. Would you like to add, Mohini?
No, I think just to repeat, well, pretty much echo what my colleague, sorry, I'm Mohini Naidu, and I work with Tracy and Sine at Ned Group Investments. I think from my personal experience as well, getting started when I was working, changing jobs, you know, in the first sort of 10 years of your career, you tend to move jobs every 2, maybe 3 years. And it's very tempting when you get started to have that withdrawal benefit. You know, when you change jobs and you've got your 4 or 5 or 10,000 Rand saved, it's very tempting to now use that toward, okay, I need to move house as well. Now I need to relocate to Cape Town or to Johannesburg or wherever it is. But as Sune said, making that small sacrifice, you would have done without it if you hadn't quit your job, right? If you weren't changing jobs.
Yes.
So it's also really, really important to preserve that retirement savings that you had. Despite the temptation that you can have this sort of free money, remember it's going to be taxed, so the tax man takes a nice fat chunk out of it. And it also sets you back so many years. You don't realize this until much later. Like when you're in your 40s or 50s even, you start to realize the 10,000 Rand that I cashed in, 15, 20, 25 years ago would have made such a material difference. And it's almost impossible to catch up because that 10,000 from 20 years ago is now worth 200, 300,000, depending on where it was invested in and how markets have performed. So get started, stay invested. Maybe not the BMW when you're starting out. Maybe I got a Toyota Taz, and it served me.
I was with you with the Toyota. Mine was even secondhand, so
I loved it.
And it's powerful, and it lasted at a good time before the BMW. And just something that, with the introduction and to understand, and even when you direct the questions, you are directing it to the right people. So I'd just like to do a brief intro of our panelists. And we've got Tracy, as she's already mentioned. So she's passionate about helping people master their money and providing them with the practical tools to achieve this. She specializes in online tools, digital advice, and retirement income solutions by training, and she's an actuary and has a master's in financial maths. I need to talk to you because I'm a lawyer.
Team up.
Please help. Send help. And then we've got Mohini Naidu, who is a senior investment analyst on the Best of Breed team. She's a CFA charter holder who has attained a postgraduate certificate in financial planning cum laude, and her interest in education has also seen her complete a postgraduate certificate in education cum laude. Stunning. Last but not least, we have Sune, and she has been an investment analyst in Cape Town, as the multi-manager team since November 2017. And your primary responsibilities include a fund manager, research and portfolio construction, and she holds a BCom degree with honors in financial risk management from the University of Stellenbosch and is also a CFA charter holder. With that also said, we can network and talk later, and if there's questions, but don't be scared to ask questions when we open it to the floor. We also have the Nedbank relationship bankers that you can speak to who can help you to get started towards achieving that financial freedom. We all want to have a good December, but we've already said, do not take a chunk out of it. So my next question then speaks to, so we've heard about the debt trap, and that's what we also started out with, that when you actually start working, you come in with debt already. And it's a frightening percentage for South Africans who have spent 80% of their income within 5 days. I've got 2 days to go. So, and does this mean we should all be avoiding debt? Because, 80% is quite a big number.
Yeah, I'll start off with this one. So okay, what do we mean when we talk about debt? It's about borrowing to finance purchases that we don't have cash for up front, right? Now, like you said, we all start off with debt. We've come out of university. Most of us have student loans. We haven't been fortunate enough to have mums and dads who've put away a little pots for our university funding. At least I wasn't.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily all bad. So I think we can differentiate between good debt and bad debt. So good debt is debt that helps you to achieve life goals. So things like an education. A car I would also classify as being fairly important to get you to your job. Or a house purchase, right? A lot of us, it's just simply unattainable without having a bond with a bank. So those are things that put you in a better future financial position. In 20 years, once you've paid off that house, you now have an asset. You're not worrying about rental payments going forward. Now, the problem with debt is that, one, it's very, very easily available. I have 5 calls from telemarketers a day from all sorts, from everybody from Woolworths to Edgar's to all of the banks saying, oh, here, we can lend you 50,000 Rand. Just click on here. And it's very easy. And it's easy to be seduced by this. It's easy to be drawn into this. So the bad debt is the kind that we use to finance our lifestyles.
Okay.
So I need a car to go to work. A TAS is very reliable. Take it from me. It's very reliable. It's going to do the job. And it's a fraction of the cost of the BMW, maybe.
Okay.
Now, it's difficult because there's a lot of peer pressure. I took a lot of stick from my friends for driving a TAS, while some of them, had fancier cars. But for me, it was about living within my means. What is my budget? What can I reasonably afford? And living within that budget. So not worrying about that other people are driving a fancy car or living in fancy houses in the good neighborhoods. So the bad debt really is about financing a lifestyle that you can't currently afford. And you pay thousands and thousands in interest on that. And I think most of us don't even realize what something's costing us. So, I mean, your bank credit card, I think even my credit cards with Nedbank, is over 20% a year. So just think about that. If you're going on a holiday, for example, that's going to cost you, 50,000 Rand for you, your partner, and your 2 kids. If you're putting that on your credit card, the actual cost of that is actually about 10 to 12,000 Rand more, which you're not realizing. So for certain things, for lifestyle choices, I think it's more important that you plan ahead, that you budget, and that you try to limit those sort of spur of the moment on a whim purchases for when you can afford them. And I think that would go a long way towards a lot of, especially with young people, it's about the right clothes and the right hairstyles and the right accessories, the phones.
Yes.
And it is difficult. It is difficult to resist that pressure. But I think if you're able to be disciplined about it from early on, it helps you avoid getting into the kind of debt that's not necessarily going to help your future lifestyle. And even for the good debt, be proactive in how you manage it, because the longer you take to pay something off and the lower that monthly payment is, ultimately, the more your interest payment will be. So even on your home loan, by paying, so let's say your bond is 10,000 Rand a month on a 1 million Rand apartment, by paying an extra 1,000 Rand a month, if you can afford to, you can reduce that payment term from 20 years to maybe 16 years. So that's 4 years of bond payments, that you've saved just by putting in a little bit extra a month. So it's about making responsible choices, asking yourself, is this debt going to help me improve my financial position in years to come? Or is it something that's just about satisfying my immediate wants now?
Yeah. But it's also, I think, just touch on what you're saying, it's having a good relationship with money, having a good relationship with your finances. And to touch on what you said, on a whim, purchases, I'm a recovering shopaholic, and I'm not afraid to say it, I'm recovering though. So how, Tracy, with the debt and the budgeting and those things that you want to buy. I mean, the new shoe is out, and I was like, I could make this up. Exactly. I can catch this up at a later time. I mean, please give us some advice on how you went from shopaholic to a saver.
Cool. So when I started my first job, I think for probably the first year, I think I spent all my money on entertainment and shopping. I was at the shop every weekend. But, I was like, I need a work wardrobe, and I was working at 91 Asset Management. You got to look the parts. This was when I used to wear high heels when I was younger. I only had high heels. I probably had like 40 pairs of high heels. Like, every somebody's like
A reward for every month.
Someone's a fan.
I think somebody might be going shopping tomorrow. I might have triggered. But no, I really, really loved it. And I think I know this is what you should not be saying at an investment event, but I also think it's okay for a few months to enjoy it. You've worked really hard, you've sacrificed a lot. So give yourself a few months. But then, as you said,
responsible rewarding.
Exactly, but limited.
Yes.
And don't say going to debt. I'm not saying going to debt.
Yes.
I'm saying what you have. Okay, fine, spend it a bit, then be responsible. There's a balance. I mean, there is. But as I worked with online tools, as you said in the intro, and so I was doing all these projections of how money grows and what happens if you cash it in and what happens if you start saving only 10 years into your career. And I was doing, because I had to do the calculations day in and day out. And every time I was like, oh, I'm going to have to save so much more if I delay this. And every day I was looking at this. And the more I was looking at this, I was like, no, you're going to have to work so hard just to get in the same position. If you just put a little bit away every month, you don't need more than 40 pairs of high heels. I mean, you can stop now. So I think for me, just seeing it day in and day out and having that reminder, being like, yes, I can keep doing this, but I'm going to make my life so hard later.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what started changing my mindset.
Sure. So, I mean, the shock is you actually looking at these online tools. I mean, even one of the things on the Money app on Nedbank is where you can track your expenditure. Just that night out, it affects. It's like, oh, no, it's just dinner. And then it's every Wednesday, and it's one of those things where, again, recovering, shopaholic, and foodie. So, Sine, budgeting and figuring out how much to spend and how much you can save can feel like quite a complex and overwhelming thing because, again, I think for you guys it's easier because you're in the profession. But me, the lawyer who did accounting without maths because the numbers were so scary for me. So what tools and in terms of budgeting and just saving, it's so difficult, especially when you're starting out as a young professional.
I think, you alluded to it now, the Money app. It's sometimes I would cringe. I remember when it's a new-ish tool. When I say new, 10 years ago or whatever. And I remember first looking at it and I was like, oh my goodness, did I spend that much of my salary? My husband and I used to track it. We're like, oh my gosh, we are terrible. But that is actually such an important part of your budgeting process because it's impossible for you to sit down and make a realistic budget without knowing what you're spending. Because the problem with saving, it's very much like, I find myself often referring to fitness, analogies. The same way is if you have this massive fitness goal that's unrealistic given your time and your abilities and whatever, you're very easily going to get disheartened, get off track, and then you're going to go oh gosh, I can't do this at all. Why even bother? And you're never going to reach your goal. Absolutely. And saving is very much the same. If you don't actually look at your bank statements and face that fear of how much do I spend on shoes, how much do I spend on my big thing is I buy way too many flat whites a day. I don't want to know what I spend on that in a month. But you need to know because you need to once off do yourself a favor and write down, I spend this much on rent, this much on petrol, this much on groceries, write everything down. Get a very realistic picture of what you spend versus what you earn. And then, like we were saying about luxury versus necessity, then find that balance that is attainable and you're saving. That's what I do once every year, once every few months. I go back to the drawing board and I say, right, what's our debit orders? What's our groceries? What's our petrol? What do my husband earn? What do I earn? What's left? Where can I shave a bit? You set up your debit order, and just like my retirement savings advice, make that debit order the day your salary comes in, because I promise you, if you make yourself get used to having the money in the account,
Yes.
you're never going to save it. You're
Nope.
it's like that run you're going to go on tomorrow, or the diet you're going to start tomorrow.
Yes.
Um,
There's always a delay or
yeah,
something
so those two, I mean, to this day, like I still do it. I have an Excel sheet. I'm very realistic. I know what we spend, and it gets more complex the older you get, because now I've got school fees, and then, like we were talking about debt earlier, then the interest rate goes up, and now my home loan goes up. So you have to keep recalibrating, keep it realistic, but just keep the debit order on, even if you have to adjust it. Also, like, be kind on yourself.
Yeah.
Even if you have to adjust it because you've got some, unforeseen expenses, but just keep it there and just
Yeah.
keep it going off on the day your salary comes in, and just never get used to it. That would be my two advice. Like,
Yeah. And if this is as daunting, if this is as daunting for you as it is for me, guys, like, we've got the relationship with bankers. I can't imagine after work now sitting down, I'd be stressed every day and having to look at my Excel, be like, okay, that 300, it becomes a bigger amount if it's a 300 every week that is out of your budget, And with the analogies of the fitness goals, please give us some advice into your SMART goals. What does that mean? And break it down for us. Sure, if we can't get up to run, can I get up to do an Excel sheet?
Okay, it doesn't have to be as daunting. It does feel daunting. It does feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to feel. Just indulge me while I read a little extract from Alice in Wonderland. I don't know if anybody here has read it, but my little one and I have been reading it. And I came across this passage which I thought was so appropriate. So Alice says, would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? And the Cheshire Cat replies, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. So Alice says, well, I don't really care much where. And then the Cheshire Cat says, well, then it doesn't really matter which way you go. So it's very, very, that analogy in investing and saving is very, very similar. You need to have a destination in mind. When you're going on a road trip, right, you need a destination, and you need to know how long it's going to take you to get there. Because if you say to your boss, well, I'm going on leave in December because I'm going on a road trip with my family, and he says, okay, great, when are you getting back? And you go, well, I don't really know, because I don't know where we're going, and I don't know how long we're going to stay there. It's not going to go down very well. So very similarly in investments, it's critically important to have a goal in mind, and whether that goal is something like retirement, or saving for your child's education, or even saving for a holiday in a couple of years, or maybe a splurge for your 30th birthday and some new shoes. But I think a good test is what they call the SMART test.
Okay.
A good test to goal setting. So when you're setting your goals, ask yourself a few questions. Is it specific? Is my goal specific? So if you have a goal that's vague, it can be really frustrating, because how do you know then what success looks like? So a specific goal, an example of a specific goal would be, I want to be able to retire when I'm 55, or I want to be able to pay for my child's education, a 4-year university degree. Okay, so is it specific? As opposed to something, I want to be rich.
Yeah.
How do you know when's rich? How do you know when it's enough?
you're never going to have enough.
No.
Exactly. How do you know when, are you going to be rich when you're 40, when you're 60, when you're 80? When do you want to get there? A measurable goal is one that you can track your progress over time.
Okay.
So if you're saying, I want to be able to save for a 4-year university degree, you'll say, right, well, what does that cost in today's terms? 100,000 Rand, for example. And you say, okay, that's where I need to get to, and I can track my progress toward that 100,000 Rand goal over time. The A is for, is it achievable? A and the R kind of go together. A is it achievable? And R is it realistic? So it's all very well and good to have to dream big, but the reality is, like Sune says, you've got to sit down, write down what you earn, write down what you spend. So it's one thing to say, I want to save R1 million in 5 years, but if you're now earning 20,000 Rand a month, you've got to pay the rent or the bond, you've got to buy your groceries, and you've got to pay for petrol, it's unlikely you're going to get there, right? So it needs to be based on your realistic means. Is it achievable with what I earn, net of all of my expenses? And I don't have to rely on outsized investment returns. So I don't have to go and find some scheme where my neighbor's telling me I'm going to get 50% a year for the next. Because we all know what, if something's too good to be true, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. It absolutely is. So, don't make yourself one of those statistics of people who were promised, lured in with false promises of these crazy investment returns, only to end up losing all of their money in these Ponzi-like schemes. So the T is then the time frame. How long do I have to get there? If it's retirement and I'm just starting out, maybe it's 30 years, maybe it's 40 years. If you have, children in primary school, Sinead's little ones are just starting school, so I know she's already talking about saving for their education. Then you think, okay, maybe it's 12, 15, whatever years it is to university. So, the time frame also matters. So these are just some 5 simple questions to ask yourself. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? And this can really help to focus your attention and keep you motivated toward achieving a goal.
Absolutely. And I love that. And I mean, it's all well and good. We write these goals down and we try and we implement them. But maybe, Tracy, you can talk about why is it so difficult to stick to the investment plan? So now I've got the goal. I can see where I'm going, but it's the baby steps, the everyday steps that are working towards that goal. So why is it difficult to stick to the investment plan?
So I'm going to continue with Sinead's analogy. So I think it's very much like if we say we want to lose weight, right? That's easy. You diet and you exercise. Cool, done. End of conversation. Go forth and do it.
Conquer.
But it's hard to do because there's temptation.
Yep.
So it's
the good food we're going to have today, guys. So if you're on a diet, are you in a financial diet or body diet?
So I think it's very much the same thing. So, I mean, there's temptations to spend. There's temptations to get into debt, which is even worse because we don't have the money. But also, I think sometimes the media also plays a role because, if you saw what happened now and you saw during COVID, markets are down and this, and then people panic and they want to jump off course or pull their money or put it, take their investments out because, you could lose a quarter. If you had $1 million, you could have lost 250,000 in a month.
Yeah.
Yes, it came back, but what a lot of people do, they pull it out and then it comes back. They're like, oh, now I feel better, but now they only got 750,000 to put back in. So I think it's really hard because our emotions are often against us with sticking the course. And then there's also new shiny things, so like Bitcoin, and then there's this, and then there's the latest trend. And I think we can easily get sidetracked from safe is boring. Who's going to talk about their safe investment that's slowly growing? Because it's compounding, it's slow, it doesn't look exciting.
Not the conversation.
But if you stick it's not conversational. Yeah. But if you stick it out at the end, it's pretty amazing. And there's always somebody who's doing well somewhere. It could be, as I said, Bitcoin, it could be hedge funds. There's always something exciting that's doing well. And it's quite hard to also resist the temptation not to chase after those different things.
Sure. It's a lot. It's a lot, and I think a lot of us, especially with all the media pressure and what you hear, and there's always an offer. There's always this, no, if you do this, and it's just learning and having a great relationship to understand, okay, how does this actually impact my personal and my individual financial choices? So again, we're working against so much and working against so much information that, again, in varsity, you'll get stores coming in, say, hey, this is a card that you need, so you don't have to be focused. You're studying. I don't want to be focusing on what I need to wear and this. So I think this is really such an informational evening for us. And again, guys, you can speak to the relationship bankers from Nedbank and keep your online activity and use hashtag Nedbank private clients and tag at Nedbank. And there's something that was mentioned earlier in terms of compound interest. I would like to understand, what do you mean? What is that to a lay person who is not in the financial sector? And it's like, okay, compound interest, what is that? And how can I use it to my advantage? And how does it benefit me in the long run?
It's the eighth world wonder.
Yes.
I'll leave our mathematician to answer it.
Do you want to start with the intro and then I'll go to the...
Yeah. So compound interest is described as the eighth world wonder. But the other part of that expression is, he who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So there's two sides to that. One's the saving and investing side, where you put aside a little bit every month or as often as you can, and you watch it grow. And like Tracy said, at the very beginning, it literally is like watching grass grow. So it's a little tiny, tiny little increments. But think of it like from the simple acorn, the mighty oak does grow, right? So you plant a tiny little seed. After a year, you might have a tiny little sapling. And in 5 years, maybe you have a plant this high. So it doesn't seem very exciting, but in 20, 30 years, you're going to have this massive tree. It's going to provide you with shade. It's going to provide you with acorns to put around your Christmas tree. I don't know what you get from oak trees.
It's going to be something, the tree.
Yeah, like you're a squirrel.
Yeah.
Yes.
I should use an apple tree rather. Okay.
Yes.
At least you can make apple pie and get apple juice. But where was I going with this? Right. So the compound interest is basically interest on your interest. So if you put 10,000 Rand away this year in an account earning 10% interest, at the end of this year, you're going to earn 1,000 Rand in interest. So at the end of the year, your 10,000's grown to 11,000. At the end of next year, you're now going to get interest on your original 10,000 plus on the 1,000 Rand in interest you earned in the previous year. So you're going to have interest on 11,000 instead of interest on 10,000. So every year, your interest portion is going to slightly get bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the early years, you can't really, so like in the early years, if you're retirement specifically, you don't really see the benefit of this. Now, the one thing that compound interest needs to work its magic is time. Very much like those plants that you lovingly tend and water and some sunlight. You know, by adding a tiny little bit every month, you can see that compound interest works for you to produce such a miracle. It really is like not just a mathematical miracle, marvel, but in real life, you'll be able to see it in terms of your retirement savings one day. But also on the other side of it is the expense side. So if you're not, if you have a home loan, if you have a car loan, by paying off a little extra, a little earlier, you end up saving thousands in interest over a long period of time. You said you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I have a bit of a poll to do, so I'm going to do two things. I think this illustrates it nicely. So imagine 50 years ago, so I think for most of us that's before we were born, but 50 years ago, imagine your grandparents were like already planning before you were born, they're like, I'm going to have this grandchild, and they put 1,000 Rand away. Okay, I'm going to give you two options. We're going to start with the first one. It just grew with inflation, so you didn't really get any growth, but even inflation compounds. So I'm going to give you three options, and then you can raise your hands what you think that 1,000 Rand, just inflation-wise, how much you'd have to have today to be equivalent to 1,000 Rand 50 years ago. So A, up to 20,000 Rand now that it would be worth. B, 20 to 40,000. And C, more than 40. So it's up to 20, 20 to 40, and more than 40. Okay? From 1,000 Rand. Okay, raise your hands if you say A. You say C. C. So it is C. So it's about 73,000
Are most of you financial people here? Because I'm still trying to.
I think they just went with the big one.
I'm still like, how did you? Why? Why
I
C?
think Tracy's presenting has made it obvious that it's massive.
It's big, guys.
Okay.
We set it up. It's an acorn tree.
I think everybody's feeling the pinch of inflation going up and up and up in the last little while.
Okay.
So, I mean, with that, you could buy like a 2015 Datsun Go, so a car analogy, just from 1,000 Rand. So now imagine today if you put your 1,000 Rand in. Just think about that. Just start, as we said. But now what's really powerful, if instead of just putting it somewhere that's just going to give you inflationary growth, you put it in the South African share market. So you went to buy a whole range of different South African shares, and you didn't panic when it went down, and when the financial crisis happened, you didn't panic, and when 2000 happened and it was the end of the world and everyone was stockpiling, you just
Stay calm.
left it. You did nothing. All you did was this grandparent put in the 1,000, and they're like, I'm just going to leave it to grow. Okay, so that same 1,000 Rand today. A, is it worth up to 500,000?
Okay.
Remember, inflation-wise, it's 73,000. B, 500,000 to $1 million, or C, more than $1 million? Okay, who says A, up to 500,000? Okay, we've got an A. B, 500 to $1 million? Okay, we got a few B's. Who says C? Okay, we got a few C's. I feel like we're coaching you guys really well.
Yes.
3.5 million rand. 3.5 million. That is like 50 cars, 50 Datsun 2015 goes. 50 almost.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I'm trying to say. If you just put it in this like inflationary thing, or you're pulling the money and chopping and changing, okay, you might have 73, you have one car, but you could have had 50 almost of the same car.
Yeah.
Like if you had actually put it in the stock market. And I know 50 years is a long time, but I'm sure we will all be around here in 50 years from
Yes,
now.
our life expectancy is also getting, longer, so we will be
Exactly.
around.
So even if you just put 1,000 rand in today,
today.
even if you should have debit orders, but even if you just start and you leave it, I'm not going to undermine. I actually had a colleague who always used to say, he's quite a character, the power of the debit order. It was quite dramatic.
Yeah.
It's true, and I think that analogy just illustrates it so well. Yes, it's a small amount, but look, it grew to 50 times what it would have been with inflation adjusted.
Sure, and I think the energies that you're using with a cars, like imagine, would you want one Datsun or want 50? That you can afford 50. So I mean, that's one way of looking at it.
Your BMW.
Or Ferrari. My Ferrari with that.
And I mean, you've explained now with the biggest enemy, like the biggest enemy for inflation. What is the biggest cause that? Is it that maybe that mental thing where you get scared and you're just like, okay, well, there's all these threats and you just want to,
So it's quite interesting. We have, and Sune's actually done quite a lot of work with her recently. We have a behavioral expert, and she looks at exactly how people respond differently to market dips and to, this movement, and why do people sometimes panic when they invest in the stock market. And literally for a lot of us, the emotional response that seeing this money fall triggers is the same as we used to have if you're walking through, I don't know, say Kruger Park and you see a lion pop out of the bush.
Yes.
Your body's emotional, physical response is the same. And so our instinct is to fight or run.
Yes.
And so it's really hard. You've got to be really aware of that. And so that's often where an advisor can help play a role, because even if you have the knowledge, often your own physical body is against you staying the course, and you go into that panic mode, and having somebody there to calm you down and say, remember what we discussed, remember we went through these scenarios, and help you calm down. Because in a stressed state, I don't know, I'm sure you've all had when you wrote your exams, and sometimes you can't think clearly because you're like in such a state, and it's like just somebody to help you calm down, like, let's look at this rationally and make a decision in the right frame of mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite scary. And I think even with Nedbank now being more digital, is that you can have access to that calming person on your relationship with your relationship banker, who's then going to say, listen, don't fret, because especially when you don't understand something, it's so easy for you to go into tangent and be like, no, but this is, and you don't understand. And there are so many situations where people are like, no, the banks are actually stealing our money. My bank is doing this. And because you don't have that understanding and don't have that relationship with your money or even with your banker. And I think going into that as an investor, and maybe speak onto that, we've heard that the equities are risky and cash is safe. Why then should an investor not have all their money in cash if that's the case?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's something that we deal with every day in our jobs, because people have seen from a couple of years ago, during that COVID month, markets tanked something like 20-30%, and everybody thought the world was ending, right? There was this virus, and everything seemed like it was going to hell in a handbag. It was all over. Get your money, stick in a pillowcase under your bed. You're just a lot safer there.
Yeah.
But Tracy's spoken to us about inflation and what that does to your spending power over time. So 1,000 rand last year or the year before is not going to buy you that same basket of goods that it is today.
Mm-hmm.
So 1,000 rand 2 years ago would have got you maybe a trolley full of goods. Today, when you take that 1,000 rand to go shopping at your local supermarket, you're not getting the same trolley full. I mean, I was horrified when I went to the shop the other day and paid 22 rand for a loaf of bread. And I was thinking, wasn't I just paying 15 rand for a loaf of bread? It felt like it was just
yesterday, yeah.
I don't know when it went from
Probably
15
was.
to 22. I don't know when it went from 15 to 22 Rand, but that's a big jump, right? That's almost like a 40, 50% jump. And I don't know about you guys, but my salary is definitely not going up 40% every year.
Yeah.
So the problem with cash is that the returns, while they're very steady, it's very predictable, you know, it's in your bank account, your 10,000 Rands there this year, your 10,000 Rands going to be there next year, plus maybe another 50 Rand, and so on. With equity markets, the risk comes in that it feels more like a roller coaster ride. So you've got that lion coming at you, and then you're running off somewhere. It really does feel like, you know, when things are going, when the roller coaster is going up, you feel all excited, and you're like, oh, this is great. It's so exciting to be here. Markets are going up. I'm making money. And when that roller coaster is coming down, you're screaming for dear life, God, please get me out of here. Let me survive. And markets, being a participant in equity markets, can often feel like that, even for professionals, even for people who work with money, who work in investments. It's scary because you think, what if this time it's going to be different and I'm not going to get my money back? But the thing with equity markets, now, while history doesn't repeat itself, we can certainly learn lessons from it. And we've seen over time that equity, investing in equity markets, so buying shares in companies, has been the asset class that has given you the best returns above inflation over the long term. So when I say long term, I'm talking about goals like retirement, you know, 5 to 10 years and longer. So not stuff that you're going to put your money in because you need a deposit for a house in 2 years, or you want to go on a holiday in 3 years. So it's not short-term goals, it's longer-term goals.
Yeah.
So over that long term, what happens with these big up and down daily or monthly movements is that it gets a lot smoother, right? So over the short term, it can feel like really, you know, your stomach dropping to the floor kind of nausea, riding that equity market wave. But over the longer term, it smooths out, and it's not so much up and down like this, and it's maybe a bit like this, but it's going in an upward direction. And the importance of that really is that it gives you growth in your capital, so it grows your real wealth, and it preserves your spending power. So that when you go to the supermarket next year or 5 years or 10 years' time, you no longer have 1,000 Rand in your pocket, you've now got 2,000 or 5,000 to keep pace with inflation. So often people say cash is safe because it's money in the bank, and you know, you can't lose money in the bank, and you can in equity markets. But I think it's important to remember that equity market volatility is often very short term. So if you've got a long enough time frame, a much bigger risk that people ignore is that by leaving your money in the bank, your savings aren't going to keep pace with inflation, which means in future years, you're either going to have to reduce your standard of living in retirement. So if you've gotten used to a certain standard of living while you're working, and now having to live off your savings, if your savings haven't grown sufficiently, you're going to have to cut down quite drastically. Or even in a worst case scenario, you know, you're going to outlive your savings. So you're going to completely run out of savings in retirement. So when we talk about risk, be clear about what risk means for you. Does it mean short-term risk, or does it mean, you know, like volatility? And do you have the time frame to ride out the volatility? Or does it mean the risk of maybe not having enough in retirement, or perhaps having to cut down my standard of living because I haven't taken on enough growth assets in my portfolio? So I think a healthy allocation to equities in any person's portfolio is critical. The amount that you would have would vary depending on what your life stage is. So if you're a young person starting out, I would say, we're not allowed to give advice, so this isn't advice, but a young person starting out in their very first job should have the maximum allocation to equity that they can. Because think about it, you've got 30, 40 years to retirement, so that's, you know, a sufficiently long time for you to not worry so much about these big up and down movements that equity markets give you. If you're closer to retirement, I think it's still important to have an allocation to equity, but maybe not the same allocation that a young, you know, someone in their 20s would have. And it could also depend on the goal that you're saving for. So retirement, I would suggest a lot more equity. If it's something short term, then, you know, definitely. So you can scale up or down your equity exposure depending on your life stage, on your goals, and on the time frame that you have available.
Okay.
I've got a. Do you want to
So
add?
you add and then I'll add.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's totally
No, I've got quite a practical way. I looked at the numbers the other day of how to put it. So if you, in your retirement fund, go with low equity, so that means you have about 40% in shares, which sounds decent, doesn't sound too bad. You have to save twice as much. So let me ask you here, who can save twice as much towards retirement? Because that's what it practically means.
Okay.
If you go lower risk, you have to put more in because it's not working for you as much. And so that means saving twice as much, which is hard. Which is
Hard
really
when bread is 22 rand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate the importance of time in investment decisions. If it's your in case of emergency funding that you need next year, equity is not appropriate. But there's this graph. There's quite a few great. It's not graphs. It's like pictures in this book that I love because it shows you on the one hand over 5 days what does the equity market do, and it does this, and then over 5 years it has a straight line because you're looking over a 5-year time period. And then it basically says choose what you look at. Mm-hmm. And what we also found in the behavioral work that we do is different personality types, there's broadly 6, respond differently to various market conditions. Most of us tend to be stressed. Most of us tend to trigger fight or flight when we see the market falls. So if you have the time, the value of having long enough time and then putting it in the equity market is to force yourself to not look at it every 5 days.
Yeah.
Because very few of us can stomach it. Some people love it. Some people get a kick out of, the stock market is down 5%, now it's up 2%. If you can't stomach it and you have the time, put it in the equity market and forget about it. And the other question I so often get working with clients is, when you talk about equity versus cash, people love referring to past performance, but what if the next 2 years is the same as the last 2 years? And my question to them is always my answer to them is always very simple. Like, equity, sure, it has a what if, but cash is certain. I can't guarantee you many things in investments. I can 100% guarantee you that cash can't keep up with inflation. That's the only thing I know. Where with equity, the potential is massive.
Yeah.
And I think it's such an important thing to just keep in mind that if you have the time, just, do yourself a favor and stomach some equity.
If I can maybe help to make this a little bit easier with an example. So when equity markets fall, we all get stressed because we think we're losing money. But think of it as, and we tend to say, I shouldn't put money in. I don't want to be in equity markets, right? We get scared. But think of it as when, whatever your favorite store is, where you like to buy your shoes at, Tracy, give me a...
I was going to say, when you go to the shop and bread is 10 rand, you're like, score!
Black Friday's coming up.
Like 4 slices.
Tracy is going shoe shopping, and now imagine if her favorite store is having a half price sale. So equity markets have fallen 50%, and her favorite store is having half price. She's going to go, well, I came in here to buy 3 pairs of shoes. I can now afford 6 pairs of shoes.
Don't fall for Black Friday.
Yeah, it's already started.
So think of it as when equity markets fall, it actually means these companies are on sale, guys. So this is really the time. Instead of saying, I want to take my money out because I'm so scared, this is the time you should be going, I can now get twice the number of shares that I could have 6 months ago.
Absolutely. Do you see why it's important to have a relationship with banker? I would have not known that equity markets go on sale.
They are on sale at the moment.
Guys, note, speak to a relationship with banker after I'm speaking to one again. I'll be like, hey, listen, you heard what they said, right? So what are we doing about this situation? No, so one of the last questions, and I really need to ask this one because, I saw the number and I'm like, Tracy, how could you possibly have turned down a job with a 40 million bonus? Do you regret it? What's that? 40 million?
So about 4 years ago, I left my job at the time without another job. So I was like, I'm going to do consulting. I'm going to do this. And one of the companies I worked with was a private equity. So they manage private companies, in other words, not listed on the stock market. And they spoke to me. And this is on top of your annual bonus. This is like 40 million. If the fund does average, if it does well, you get more at the end in about 8 years.
Sure.
And I had to think really hard, like for 2 weeks, because you always say, do what you love. It's not all about the money, but when you're in the situation, it's like, Could I learn to love this job?
I think I could. I think I could.
It was a very hard decision, but I'm still glad I turned it down because I would have really hated. I really didn't enjoy it. It was a lot of writing reports and governance and probably more like
What I would do.
what you would love.
Can we talk?
And I was like, I can't put myself through this for 8 years. I just
I
couldn't.
can write.
I'll talk all day, just don't make me write it down. But I think what's really important, and I think it ties in nicely what you've been speaking about, is it's not saving for the sake of saving. We're not sitting here saying don't spend and don't enjoy your life and save and accumulate as much money as you can. At the end of the day, money is there for a purpose. It's not there to control us and to force us to make, 8 or 10 year decisions in our life that we hate our lives for 8 or 10 years. Like, I do think it's important. And it helps with that discipline, to that weight loss diet, exercise analogy. If you know and you have something in mind and you know what you're working towards, and money isn't just about money, like it's about value and enjoyment of life. I think you think about things differently, and it's easier to stick with what you've said than I'm just accumulating, or I need more because I want to be wealthy. Like, spend a bit of time thinking about what you want money for, like not so that I don't have to work, be a little bit more like
Specific. Yeah.
And I think through the process, be kind to yourself. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here now with a math degree and a whatever risk management. I've made so many financial mistakes in my life, but you are going to make them. Put it behind you, move on, get the debit order, get the whatever set up again, and go forward. And I often tend to stress about, now with petrol's up and the home loan is up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't. It's hectic, and I've got 2 kids.
Yeah.
And my husband's so good at always just reminding me. He's like, relax, you fine. There's fat in the system. If you need to, you can cut this, you can cut that. It's okay if you don't save this month. Get back to it.
Yeah. Almost like having an accountability partner.
And it's so much the same as fitness. Like it's so easy to give up. If you don't know what to do and you don't know how to fix it, it's like, this wasn't meant for me. I'm rather just going to give up because I don't want to fail. I think humans are all scared of failure. And I think when it comes to saving, just don't be. You are going to fail. You are going to make mistakes. But the quicker you just get up and go again, the better. And 100%, like Tracy says, you also have to enjoy your money.
Yeah.
We're not
even fitness is a cheat day.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Even,
And I had 4 cheat days this weekend, and it was lovely. And it's okay. I'm back on the bandwagon. Time for the next weekend.
So before we actually go into the other questions on the floor, there are a couple of questions from LinkedIn.
Okay.
And they haven't they haven't said who they're posing the questions to, so you will just pick up whatever. So we've got from Dumsani Mona, who says, financial literacy gap is huge in our society. Something needs to be done at an early age, where before varsity and working age. So I think that's more of a comment than anything. Yeah. And then we've got Tibure Ziane, who says, is the concept of investment the same for entrepreneurs as it is for professionals or employees?
So this is interesting because
Yeah.
my husband has his own business, and we always have this tension. He's always like, I'll start my retirement annuity later because I have the business investment, and he is in the phase when his business is growing. So it's really tricky. And I think how I've explained it to him and how I look at it is, if all your money is tied up in your business and something happens, or the business goes insolvent, or something happens, you have nothing. Nothing. So I do think, yes, you want to reinvest in your business. And even if, as much as you believe in your concept, let's take, for example, things happen like COVID. Things happen that even if you have the most amazing restaurant in the whole world, things can still happen like COVID. And it doesn't matter how great your business plan is. There's always some unexpected thing. So I would just say, yes, your split is probably a little bit different, but you do need to have something outside of that, especially if your business is more mature and you don't need to reinvest as much.
but also then to be careful about even your reinvestment as an entrepreneurs. And speaking of entrepreneurs, we do have our stall owners here who you can network with afterwards and just find out about their product offering and also get some of their goodies that they have for us in our goodie bags. So I think even with that, so like what is you can go into it where it's the employees entrepreneurship, because again, it's a risky thing where you are starting out this business, the first year you do great. And then the last thing you can even do is save when you're an entrepreneur. It's
Yeah, I think when you are an entrepreneur, your in case of emergency funding just becomes so much more important.
your emergency fund needs an emergency fund.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're a salary earner, even if you're a little bit in the red because of some unforeseen expenses, I know what's going to come into my bank account on the 20th every month.
Yes.
It's predictable. And I think as an entrepreneur, I agree with Tracy that balance is so important because, yes, you have to reinvest, but it's even more important for you that don't earn a salary to have a nest egg for in case things go wrong, that you don't, because what you don't want to be is in a position where you're forced to sell your business or give it up because you can't can't afford it anymore.
Absolutely.
So diversification, I mean, that's a whole other evening by its own.
And especially in the early years when it can be quite cyclical. So you might have 6 fantastic months and then you might have a couple of bad months. But if you've kind of trained yourself to rely on a steady source of income, it could change in any month. So I think it's even more important to be disciplined when you're an entrepreneur.
Yes.
To have that discipline of putting aside just a little bit to see you through the times which maybe are not as great as the good times. And I mean, in a simple way is to just not put all your eggs into one basket. So absolutely back yourself, but have a safety net.
Absolutely. So I think it goes back to what you're saying, which if you just start, you also build that confidence whether you're an employee or an entrepreneur. So if you just start and over the years you're building your more confidence to then make the right decisions or take the risk in terms of your finances.
So Nay actually reminded me when you were talking now, most businesses fail because of cash flow issues. So if you think about it in terms of protecting your business, if most business fails because of cash flow issues, how do you put something in place that protects that? And I mean, I know that happened to my husband. Now, I was his emergency savings because I'm a diligent saver. But I'm saying if people don't have that and most businesses fail because of cash flow issues, are you really acting in the best interest of your business if you have no backup for your cash flow problem?
Absolutely. Sure. So we've got 3 more questions from LinkedIn, and then we'll give it to you guys. So think about what you would like to ask. Me, I'm going to ask afterwards about compound interest again. I just want to understand it a little more, sit down with you and be like, okay, this is what I'm sitting with. What can we do, So from Samuel, who says, what are the advantages of diversifying when investing? I think you touched on it a bit, but would you like to expand?
I think, quite simply, it's just you don't want. We all work hard for our money. You've put in the habits, discipline in place. Now you've got this sum of money. The last thing you want is your entire sum to be exposed to one thing. The beauty of the markets and investing is that the various shares, the various asset classes, the various products, each respond to events in the market differently. So there's so many beautiful examples where in one certain event, the one thing will go up and the other thing will go down, and the one thing will go up a little bit less and the other thing will go down a little bit less. And if you diversify and you expose yourself to all of those potential scenarios, instead of either making a killing in the one year and then losing everything the next year, you get this gradual, again, like the boring watching paint dry kind of investing where you're getting some growth, you're getting some alpha, but because it's coming from these various sources, it's behaving differently. It's an upward trend and not like an all or nothing approach. The last thing you want with your money is an all or nothing approach, right? It's like that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You come all the way to the end and then you get nothing, right? You don't want to be in that situation.
So it's just about managing your risk, really.
Absolutely.
You don't expose yourself to just one thing and rely on that one thing to do really well. And maybe it will, but maybe it won't.
Again, also like another type of a safety net
Yeah.
Correct,
in
correct. So
diversifying.
I mean, diversification is referred to as the free lunch in investing. There's not a lot of free things in investing. Diversification is. So it really does help to spread your risk across different asset classes, across, even if you want to invest in equities, you're not going to go out and put all of your money in one company, right?
Okay,
You're going to maybe invest in a unit trust, which has, 30 or 40 different companies that they're investing in. So if one or two of them go through a bad patch, one of these startups that had some cash flow difficulties, maybe there's a couple more established ones like a Nedbank in there that is gonna give you a kind of steady dividend, and it's gonna keep your basket afloat.
Well, it's quite amazing actually with the history of investing. So things like unit trusts and funds. So unit trust is, as Mohini mentioned, is managed by a professional, and it can have, some of our funds have more than 10,000 different investments in it, if you're talking about spreading. But when investments first started out, you had to go and buy shares. So you might only have had enough money to buy one share, and then next month you only have enough money to buy this share, and then the next month, and it was really, really hard to get a good portfolio that was well spread. Now you can literally go, here's my 250 Rand I'm putting in, and I can buy 10,000 different investments with my 250 Rand, which I think for the population as general and what it means for our finances, it's really amazing from where things were maybe like 100 years ago.
But what you're saying as well is that there are actually professionals that are helping you with this and watching this for you, so that you're not sitting there and stressing out and you don't have to do it.
Absolutely.
So we've got another one from Oliswa Fulton, who says, are young professionals offered estate planners?
So that, I think, is for the bank. I know we do have an estate planning division in Nedbank, so I'm sure there is an offering. I just don't know exactly how it's structured. I don't know if Gwen is around, but Gwen, I'm sure we
But I think some of the questions, like that specific one, you can pose that question to privateclients@nedbank.co.za, and there you can find out more information and then maybe get in touch with a relationship banker from just that email. With some of the, they've already said so much. They can't work across all the departments.
But there is definitely a division in estate planning, so there is an offering. I just can't tell you what it is exactly.
So they must definitely email and speak to the relationship bank and find out more.
Yeah.
And then the last question from LinkedIn is from Michael Crawford, and he says, I'm a client with this product and also bank with 2 other major banks. As a young professional, I must say the lack of lifestyle benefits, especially travel benefits, is a major competitive disadvantage. What product is he talking about?
Sorry, say that again, please. The lack of life.
The lack of lifestyle benefits,
So like with
especially
some
travel benefits.
lounge access.
It's probably to make
But
discovery.
we have lounge access if you've got Nedbank private clients. Hashtag. There is lounge access. I know even if you do bookings for your flights, for instance, you do get points and you into your
Greenback.
Yes, in
And you can
greenbacks.
invest your greenbacks.
Absolutely. And there's
And
what
if you
Shop
swipe your
Evo
Amex,
as
you
well.
get double.
Yeah, and did you know, so, speaking of going out and entertainment and whatever, so for a family of 4 now to go to the movies, I don't know if anybody's been to the movies lately. We haven't been for 2 years, and we went a few months ago. It was ridiculous. The 4 of us cost something like 800 Rand, and this was for, because then you have to get your popcorn, and you have to get your Coke, and you have to get your box of Smarties, and it just adds up. And then my Nedbank, because I bought my tickets with my Nedbank card, I can't remember which cinema this is. New Metro. Okay. You actually get 50% off, and I thought that was such a fantastic benefit. It just
That's what I'm saying. I think I can.
Evo. That's probably an Evo.
Yes, an Evo as well.
That's
So I've
just
done
from
like
your-
groceries there, and even with the greenbacks, it's just again building a relationship with your finances and understanding what more benefits that you have. Again, we must not only rely on the media for the scary stories. We must actually also see the benefits that you get even as a young professional. So,
And I think it is really about taking ownership as well. So being accountable for knowing what I didn't know what this. I work for Nedbank. I didn't even know I had this benefit. When we got there, it was such a wonderful surprise for me. But again,
it was for free. You're just like, oh my gosh.
exactly. So you can go twice.
Yes.
But it is about investing the time to say, okay, I've got my banking with this company, what are the actual benefits that I have available to me? Is there AVO? Is there, half price of movie tickets? And being able to take advantage of those.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know what you're paying for those benefits.
Yeah.
Like what's your bank fees? And again, this is really boring, but there's this really cool thing on the Money app where, so if you swipe your American Express card, you get double greenbacks. And I'm that annoying person that always go, do you take Amex? And then they say yes, and there's little other hacks, like on a Wednesday, you get double greenbacks if you fill up at BP, and like there's lots of little things like that. And it's boring, but you can invest your greenbacks directly off the Money app into a unit trust. And I actually do that, and I find it to be quite a fun game to see how much can my greenbacks actually grow to by investing it all the time. Now, sure, it's not as exciting as, I don't know, sitting in a lounge for free or whatever, but it's worth so much more. I mean, like it's free money that, so.
But it's almost like a reward of sorts, but again, you have to invest the time and understand.
I suppose choose... I think we said it earlier, like be clear what's important to you and what you want, and then know what you pay for it and know what you're willing to pay for it.
Absolutely. So with that, there will be a roving mic, and you guys can ask questions while we are here before we close off, and also say bye to our TimesLIVE and our LinkedIn guests tonight. And what we will also, the lighter note, which will be more fun, we're going to have a sip and paint where you're going to get an opportunity to paint and how you see money. I'm really looking forward to see how we see money.
Try.
Right now, I'm sitting with a dragon in my head.
Like a big black hole.
Yes.
My two kids.
Exactly. So you guys can ask questions. I'm sitting with a dragon, and I don't know how I'm going to achieve drawing a dragon, but it has to somehow come up. Where's the mic? There you go. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question. Just for the recording, we would need you to project, please. Sorry.
I hate the sound of
Don't
my
be
voice.
scared. It's about money.
That is the scary part. I have a bunch of questions, and my question is, we talk about putting your eggs in one basket, and property is one of those, right, where you bound to this thing for the next 20, 25 years of your life. And we know that depending on where you buy the property kind of sort of determines the value of the property in the long run. And I'm sitting in a situation where I'm in that stage where I'm thinking of buying a property. And I'm thinking to myself, going, do I want to pay with current interest rate and whatever the case may be, do I want to pay 25 grand a month towards my bond, or do I want to save 25 grand in an investment account, right? That's my first question. Then the second one is, we talk about repaying stuff a lot quicker than you should. And I think one thing we never talk about is, when are you ever actually doing the right paying off quicker, right? Okay. Because, I have a car, I'm paying 3 grand more into that car every month because I want to try accelerate it, but then I'm also taking away from the fact that I could be investing that money as well, or I could be saving it, or I could be doing something else with it, right? And there's that part. And also, like, I feel like I'm in a situation where I'm saving so much. I have a savings
That's
there,
great.
I have a savings there, that's it there. But because at the end of the month, I feel like I also don't see my money. Right? Because you're saving towards that, you're saving towards the house, you're saving towards this, you're saving towards that. And we all know, like, savings account is not it's not as exciting.
Yeah.
So, so when is it that you're ever saving a lot, where you should kind of consolidate your savings? I'm saving for a go, like traveling, and I'm investing towards my future, and that's it. Or should I carry on putting my money into, like, all the different baskets out there and hoping that when it's time to retire, I get that value back? So, yeah.
Sure.
Those are two loaded questions.
Yeah.
I'll tell you how I think I'm going to pick it as the things pop up. I think we can go through it. But I have never bought a car on debt. So to give you an example, I had a Taz, as I said. I drove that, saved up, so I drove that for a long time. Then I bought a Yaris, second hand. I've never owned a new car. Bought a Yaris, kept it till I was 10 years old. I was chief operating officer. I was driving a Yaris. But I was like, you know what? This is not an asset, and any good asset manager should not have an expensive car if they know the true value of an asset. But so I do think like there's aspects for me, and it depends what you value. But for me, I'm like, yes, I love a nice car. I would love a Ferrari. That would be amazing. But there's things I value a lot more than that. So for me, that's sort of an easy decision. Yes, it takes quite a few years, and that's why I also keep the car so long, because instead of having the repayment with interest, then basically I save up and I buy another second-hand car that's like 3 years old. So that's how I think about cars. I think the house one is a bit trickier because you would still have to live, so you won't save the full amount. And I think how I think about property, as I said, property is a lifestyle decision, but I guess it's about, are you happy renting and not having your layout or your aesthetics or control, potentially having to move? For me, I prefer to own, even if it's a smaller place. I like to have I don't know if that makes sense, sort of like I want my kitchen laid out a certain way so that it's convenient and it works for me. And if you rent, you don't have those choices. So I guess, and even answering your third question, comes back to what you value. So I do think it's important having, okay, I'm going to allow myself to spend this 2,000 or whatever I want every month. This is my like enjoyment money, or whatever it is you decide. Or maybe for you, if it is to say, I want to spend a year traveling around the world and not working, like I don't know what it is, like you could have a specific goal, but I think just saving, and I don't know if I'm getting the gist of your question, but just saving for I don't know exactly what I'm saving for. I do think you are missing some of the enjoyment in life if you're only saving and you're not enjoying any of it.
Yeah, and
I don't know if that...
yeah, and I mean, Mo explained it so beautifully with a smart goal. The problem if you're just saving for the sake of it, you're not really knowing what you're saving for, the chances are your money's going into the wrong products. You know what I mean? So if you're just putting this money away in a fixed deposit because I just need to save, and you end up leaving it there for 10 years, your opportunity cost is massive.
Okay.
So the one thing that I picked up in your question is that there seems to be uncertainty. You've got the good discipline and the habit of putting your money away and you're not spending it. But I think there's definitely value for you to go sit down and say, right, what am I putting away every month? What is this for? When am I going to need it? And label some buckets. Make it specific and measurable, etc. It sounds terrible because I know it's hard, but I'm with Tracy on the car. The quicker you pay a car off, the better. So that's the one thing where I would say, awesome that you're putting extra money in. It's an expense and not an asset. But yeah,
I would add on
it's a loaded question.
Yeah. On the property side, I think it is very personal to you. Like Tracy said, she wants to have her kitchen designed a certain way. So if you're renting, you don't have that option. If you're an owner, you do have that option. There is a trade-off, though. So the trade-off between renting and owning is control. And for me, it's emotional safety. So when you rent, you're it's at the moment with interest rates where they are, and property prices in Cape Town especially, it is getting onto the property market is a very scary and a very daunting, and for some people even just not a possible task at all, and maybe your only option is to rent. But for me, it felt like at the end of 20 years, and hopefully sooner, if I put a little bit of my bonus goes into my bond every year so that I am reducing, it's going to be sooner than 20 years that we pay it off. At the end of the 20 years, I know that I own this house. So I'm not going to have a landlord who's going to suddenly decide they want to sell, and then I have to find somewhere else to move. And I'm also at the mercy of what our rental payment's going to be like. So it might go up by 5% a year, it might go up by, so have that a bit more certainty. Sure, when interest rates go up, my bond payment's going to go up, but at the end of that period, I've paid off the bond. The trade-off, of course, is that with renting, you don't have to worry about things like my geezer's burst, call the landlord, sort it out. If you own that house, if your geyser bursts, you've got to sort
the
it out.
landlord.
Exactly, you're the landlord. You've got to sort it out. So there's a trade-off, and it's really about working out what you can afford. So if for 10,000, let's say you've got 10,000 rand to spend on accommodation, the reality is in Cape Town, there's not a lot you can get for 10,000 rand. In the inner city, maybe you'll get a 40 square meter bachelor flat, maybe. I don't know what things cost, right? But if you go use that 10,000 rand a month to rent in maybe the southern suburbs, maybe you're getting yourself a nice 2-bedroom apartment with a garden or whatever the case may be. So
Fresh air and peace and quiet.
Sinead's
I
just
live in
moved
the
to the
burbs.
suburbs. I'm the one in the tiny town side.
Yeah.
So it's about that trade-off. But the other part of buying then, or paying off your debt sooner, is let's say you pay off your car in 3 years instead of 5. You then have that, I can't remember what the amount was, that 5,000 rand a month to invest, to enjoy things that you might not, So it's about sacrificing immediate wants for future kind of financial security.
Also, you can buy a really the flat. My first place I owned was a flat. It was disgusting. My mother was like, "What have you done?" I'm not like it had black mold growing everywhere. The paint was falling off. It was dirty. There was orange fat droplets on the ceiling. The kitchen hadn't been done since 1960. It had brown mosaic tiles on the wall. It was a 1-bedroom and it was really bad. But I was like, I'm going to buy it because I'm going to do it up and it's going to be cheaper and this is all I can afford. And the other thing I actually did, I set aside the money for about 6 months of what I had to pay, and what I thought I could afford and what I could actually afford was different. So it also helps to set it aside. I know that's not specific to that question, but yeah.
And also just going back to that, to then go to your relationship bank and find out what actually you can afford and work around that, and don't go see the new apartment box and you're just like, 3 million sounds reasonable. And then you go to the bank, they're like, you qualify for 1.5 million. Now how am I going to
Don't tell the estate agent 1.5, tell them 1 or 1.2 because they're always going to upsell you to something nice.
We'll take 2 more questions before we round off. And what you can do, because we have the privilege of having our panelists and our speakers there, you can still ask them the questions when we get an opportunity to do a sip and paint. We're going to need to sip a little more than the painting after this conversation. So you also will still have an opportunity just to do probably a one-on-one, and also the relationship bankers that you can speak to after we've done the proceedings. Just 2 more questions and we have to close off, unfortunately.
Hi, my name is Sean. So we're all young professionals here, and there's a whole lot of white noise when it comes to finances and everything. And when you start working, debt is easily and freely available. But what is the banks doing to incentivize us to make investments more available to us? Because those are better financial decisions for us, but banks are just pushing debt to our faces day in, day out. So why aren't you
Nedbank, tell us.
why aren't you making investments as easily accessible to us, just as you're making debt accessible?
So, I'll start on the part that comes to mind and you work, and then I'll think. But on the Nedbank app, you can buy unit trusts, you can buy retirement annuities, you can buy offshore. So it is all there. It's quite quick and easy to open. But yeah, the debt thing is a harder question, I guess, to answer. I guess debt is an easier sell than investments. People want debt, but that doesn't justify the industry's response to it.
I must say my experience with Nedbank, I found it quite difficult to get debt at Nedbank, actually. I've got a home loan with Nedbank. I think it's more your clothing retailers. It's not really your banks that are phoning you and pushing the debt in your face. It's my experience.
I don't get phone calls anymore from
get
banks.
yeah,
I do get from Woolworths.
It's Woolworths
and stores and
yeah. But I think that's a good way of looking at it.
I take your point though, Sean. My brother, who's not a professional and doesn't have a tertiary education, was offered debt access to easy credit by a bank, and I'm thinking, how on earth are they offering him a credit card with 20,000 rand of debt? there's just no way he can ever afford to pay it. And I was quite horrified about that. So I do take your point about easy credits and people, and of course he jumped at it. He was like, wow, this is fantastic. But he didn't think about, how am I actually going to repay this?
And the interest rates are insane.
Interest rates yeah, exactly. And the kind of paradox is, the less you can afford debt, the more you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So someone who can't really afford to have a 20,000 Rand credit facility is going to pay 20% interest, versus somebody who earns maybe 100,000 Rand a month, and then the bank's going to say, actually, you're a good risk, so I'm going to charge you maybe 12% interest.
Okay.
So I do take your point, and I do think it is an important consideration, particularly in a country like South Africa. So it's not just the banks, it's not just the retailers, it's also the informal lenders, right? So the guys who are lending you, what's it called? The payday loan or something.
The revolving.
Like a week or
A
two,
lay-by.
get money for a week or two and then pay it
Yes.
back.
Yeah, and it's at ridiculous
reserves.
interest rates.
Yeah.
But I think what might be, so who are you making wealthy when you take out, when you take on debt? You're not making yourself wealthy. You're getting yourself into a really bad position, but you're making somebody else wealthy, whether it's the bank or the retail store or the whatever. So think about, who is this actually helping? In the long term, is it going to be helping to improve my financial position? And if not, it does require a lot of discipline, because it's basically saying no to something that's, tantalizing and tempting, and yeah, maybe I can go buy those pair of shoes this month. So it does at the moment rely, there's a lot of personal kind of accountability for you to know, can I afford this or can I not afford this? Because it is too easy. It is seductive in a way, having this access. But I do think it's something that the financial industry could be better at encouraging more kind of financial discipline, rather than encouraging you to take on this debt which you might not be able to afford.
So Sean, I mean, I think what we're saying is the industry's got better, but there's still a way to go. But there's quite an interesting bank in Scandinavia, and they've developed this thing called Dreams, which has all sorts of interesting things to encourage you to save. Like, if your soccer team scores, every time they score a goal, you can say, I want to invest or save 5 Rand, or every time you buy a cup of coffee, or they've got all sorts of, or you can say, I'm going to eat vegetarian this week, and then they're going to take off so much savings. So there's some quite interesting things actually being done around sort of making investing and saving more fun and more interactive. But yeah, I do think, although we've come a lot better, I do think there's
A long
more
way
to
to go.
more
And I
to
think
go.
the flip side of that, again, is just remembering which is the good debt and which is the bad debt, because debt on its own is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, many of us, myself included, wouldn't have been able to realize some of our dreams. I would not be owning the home I have today if I didn't have a home loan.
Yeah.
So it's just remembering, what is this going toward? Is it going toward my future financial security? I need it, I'm using it to buy a home, which is for my future financial security, versus am I using it to fund a lifestyle that I can't really afford? So debt on its own is not necessarily bad. It's about you making the choices that will help improve your future financial position at the expense of some immediate wants rather than needs.
Last question.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mbali. So I know we haven't obviously dived too deeply into diversification of investments, but I just wanted to find out, in terms of property investments, what are sort of like the pitfalls that we can look out for? Is it a good opportunity to diversify your portfolio? Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Zimbali,
Mbali.
Zimbali, hi. Are you talking about physical property or listed, like
Physical
buying a house?
property.
Physical.
For obviously potential to rent it out and get an income from that.
Yeah. Sure, it's quite a tricky one, because there's a whole, if you're buying to rent, there's a whole host of factors to consider. At the moment, interest rates are high. I think banks lend differently to people who are buying to own versus buying to rent, and I'm not really an expert on that side of it. But I suppose for you as an investor, some things to consider would be whether you're buying to own or buying to rent, how can I afford this? If interest rates are going up, ask yourself, if I have another 2-3 interest rate hikes, am I buying within my affordability range? Can I absorb those interest rate hikes? If I get a tenant in that defaults, am I going to be able to meet that cost if my tenant defaults? What are some?
I think the reality about, buying physical properties as an investment opportunity is a complex field, because the reality is that 80% of the time, if not more, the rent that you earn off the property is less, and sometimes substantially less than what you have to pay on the loan. So you really are making quite a big call on the capital growth that the property offers, and the tax on properties, physical properties, has become a lot more penalizing, punitive than what it used to be. And it's a massive hurdle that you have to consider, your transfer duty. So it's complex because, a place like Woodstock always comes to mind. I've lived in Cape Town now for 15 years, and I feel like Woodstock has been this up-and-coming buy house in Woodstock forever. And I don't think people that bought a house in Woodstock 15 years ago have realized their capital gain yet. So investing property, as you can hear, I'm a conservative investor. I'm not saying no, I'm just saying it's so complex because a big part of your growth depends on whether or not you can realize the capital gains enough to cover your monthly shortfall of the rent you earn versus the bond you're paying, plus that massive hurdle that SARS takes on transfer duty.
So in the long run, residential property, and I'm talking about long and well spread out, because now you're only picking one out of all of these, roughly your capital grows with inflation. Roughly. But the reason we can't answer this question is because you could have this, because you're not going to own like thousands of properties. You only get one shot at it. And what happens if that one shot is the wrong shot? And I think that's why it's such a hard question to answer, because you can't look at an average. Like, we can tell you shares across a range, like roughly give you this. So what we're saying is, at the end of the day, whatever cost you have to put in that falls short, and your upfront costs to SARS and all of that, when you get to the end, you're roughly going to have on the capital inflationary growth, but obviously some of it was funded by debt, but that can swing wildly depending on which one you picked. And so you've got to decide, are you comfortable with going with that chance of picking one and getting the right pick and hoping it's the right pick?
Again, goes into the risk.
Correct.
But house maintenance is expensive.
Absolutely.
Painting a house is a horrific expense.
But as an asset class, listed property,
Painting a canvas outside is not.
Yeah. No, that sounds fun. Painting my house was not fun.
So just to, we're under pressure in terms of time, and just to round off, like, one-liners, what advice would you give to your younger self, who's just starting out in their young professional career? One line, then we paint and we talk afterwards.
Mine would be, don't cash in your withdrawal fund when you change jobs.
Set up a debit order tonight before you change your mind.
Just start.
That's amazing. Thank you guys for all the information today. It's a lot. We need to download a lot of it and take it all in. And again, guys, thank you to Nedbank for this opportunity. And thank you guys for sharing yourselves and sharing the information and your mistakes and making sure that we don't make the same mistakes. So thank you for joining us this evening. As I've said, we can still network and also encourage you to speak to the store owners. As entrepreneurs, we need help. We need you guys to understand what we're doing so that we can start saving as entrepreneurs, So I encourage you to please speak to the store owners and just see what their product offering is, and you will get some stuff thanks to Nedbank in our goodie bags from our store owners tonight. Again, after a bit of sipping and painting, we're going to have a different picture of our painting and our picture of what our money looks like, right? So I think let's sip and then let's paint. And the dragon is already like disappearing. I can see, you know, that I'm good. I'm going to be okay. And we have the relationship bankers that if there's still some more questions that you'd like to ask, we've got the relationship bankers, and also just email private clients, Nedbank at privateclients.co.za, and get more information and start today, so that in 20 years, you're going to be sitting here and telling us, like, this is what I did. This is how I started. Thank you for having us today. And from me, good night. And we're going to go and mingle and paint.